when we look out at the world, Samir, we look for partners. We don't look for preachers, particularly preachers who don't practice at home what they preach abroad. Europe, I think, has entered a certain zone of reality check. Now, whether they are able to step up to it or not, it's something we will have to see. Now, when you come to Europe, I think Europe has a real predicament on its hands. A few years ago, say 5 years ago, Europe thought it had an optimal positioning, that, between energy from Russia, the Chinese markets and American security, it looked all very neat. Each part of it today is under stress, to put it very politely. Now, on top of it, Europe had a selective belief in the indivisibility of the world. When it liked the world to be connected, they believed in indivisibility. When it didn't, there was a fortress Europe. So what has happened is Europe is today under pressure to change because the realities of multipolarity are dawning on it. I think it's still not adjusted and absorbed it fully. United States has dramatically changed position. The Chinese are doing what the Chinese were doing. Russia has, again, Russia's connection with the Arctic, you know better than me. They have built it into their history, I would say almost their folklore, in a way. So we are going to see, in a sense, arena or a domain of contestation, which is not going to be easy to recall. Now, this is not unique. We are going to see it in space. We're going to see it underwater. We're going to see it in AI. So we are looking at a much more contested world, much sharper competition, where it will be a challenge for the world and for individual nations to find some kind of equilibrium and get people to work together. It's not going to be that easy or comfortable to arrive at.
Minister, if I can jump in here and maybe ask you a more specific question. What are the expectations, and I know there are plans for a visit to this part of the world, but more broadly, if we take Europe and the EU as an actor in this particular equation, what are India's expectations from an EU partnership? That's the first part of the question. And the second, of course, is that, you did make a very important point that maybe Donald Trump has popularized Arctic beyond the traditional circles of examination. Now, as a follow-up,
the syllabus has become more popular.
The syllabus has become more popular. That's right. So now the question for you is, how do you mobilize constituencies at home to respond to perhaps this moment when maybe, like President mentioned, Indian private sector and other stakeholders could be motivated to look at this region more closely?
Well, when you ask me about Europe, you mean on Arctic or generally speaking?
Generally speaking. Considering where they are right now, they tried to play the strategic autonomy game, like you mentioned, security from America, energy from Russia, markets from China, strategic autonomy of a European variety, not going that well right now. But how do you and what do you as India expect from Europe?
Well, look, when we look out at the world, Samir, we look for partners. We don't look for preachers. Particularly preachers who don't practice at home what they preach abroad. And I think some of Europe is still struggling with that problem. Some of it is changing. So the issue for us, in many ways, Europe, I think, has entered a certain zone of reality check. Now, whether they are able to step up to it or not, it's something we will have to see. But from our point of view, if we are to develop a partnership, there has to be some understanding, there has to be some sensitivity, there has to be a mutuality of interest, and there has to be a realization of how the world works. And I think these are all work in progress to differing degrees with different parts of Europe. So some have moved further, some a little bit less.
I'm so tempted to make this conversation about the point you've just raised, but we will end it there on this particular aspect that Europe has to get beyond preaching and start acting based on a framework of mutuality. What about India's own constituencies? How do you mobilize them to act in this new world, which is so, in some sense, geometrically different?
You know, part of the reason why I always found President Grimson's visits and our conversations interesting, because he was, I mean, at least speaking for me, he was broadening my horizons with every conversation. And I think as a country today, we need to broaden our horizons. Because as I said, when I look at the size, I mean, just think of an India, let us say population would be about 1.6, 1.7 billion. Per capita income of say 10,000, 12,000, $15,000. What would be the resource demands of that India on the world? What would be the contribution of India to that world? So even today when we look at key partners, sometimes people read us too tactically. You know, if I were to refer, for example, to a subject which has been, last few years a little controversial, India-Russia. You know, there is such an important fit, a complementarity between India and Russia as a resource provider and a resource consumer. When I look at where all Indian diplomacy, typically we would look at, a very simple sort of political metric. Today I have a different range of partners in different domains, and one very important domain is resources. So that is why a Russia, an Australia, a Brazil, an Indonesia, Africa, these are important for us. And that is why connectivity, we've been discussing, for example, President, we have a project called Chennai, in the south, Vladivostok corridor. Now, this was our little bit of preparation for something which is to come, which is the Northern Sea route. So for us today, the NSR, the NWP, the Northwest Passage, the TSR, these matter because just like IMEC matters, that or the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, because the world is, we're going to, if technology changes, literally with climate change, geography is going to change. Okay, climate is going to change. Our which economies work to what extent in which areas is going to change. With all these moving parts, I think it's kind of important that there is an awareness in our country. And one of the, I think, positives I see when I look today at the number of universities, and I'm sure many people sitting here are connected to them, that I think at last count we have about 25 universities, and my number may be a bit behind. 25 universities actively connected with research or some kind of policy making on the Arctic policy. The fact that we are today producing research papers much more prolifically than in the past. So it isn't just a question of one research station, 2 observatories, 2 antennas, and a ground station out there. I think things are happening at home that is supporting a much deeper engagement with the Arctic. And I would even say to President, and I'm sure I'll make a few other people in the room happy, that is one of the drivers of our intensive engagement with the Nordics. That, if you look at it, we are due for the next India-Nordic summit very shortly. Among the initiatives that you have seen in the last 10 years under Prime Minister Modi, one which nobody saw coming, but which has actually been sustained, which has been very serious, has been really the extent of our Nordic engagement.